very first webinar in our Small Wins series for the Women in Research initiative. Absolutely delighted. There's so many of you turning up. I can already see there's 82, and I can see that Sana's furiously letting people in as quickly as she can. So, welcome. Sorry, somebody then just tried to call me, just technology overload. What the plan for today is to introduce very briefly a little bit about women in research. I then want to talk a little bit about the concept of what do we mean by small wins, why have we called this a small wins series, and then I'm going to spend about 15-20 minutes talking about mental health and well-being. And then we will go to our wonderful panel. We have two Australian Research Council laureates, Christine Beveridge and Lorraine Mazerolle, and I'll introduce both of those guys a little bit more to you later. Just a couple of housekeeping things while we're getting ready to roll. First of all, you should have been sent a link to Slido, and this is where you can ask questions. There'll be a few questions posed to you. And you just need to use that code there, #WINR, which is quite a nice little hashtag, #winner. And you also, we're going to be asking all of you, if you want, it's completely voluntary, to set and share a small goal that you might like to try and work on as a result of today's session. So, and that will be through the Facebook group, which is only open to members. Well, I'll come back right at the end and talk a little bit more about what my small goal will be as an example, and just again encourage you to go onto Facebook and do that. So just a couple of housekeeping things. If you can, I think we're in control of you, and I think we might have muted you and turned off your cameras, but if not, if you can, please do that. That would be terrific. If you have any problems, message the support team using the chat function in the event. Sana's flat out letting people in, so she might not have much time to deal with that, but we're there if possible. And I guess I'd just like to encourage you. I know myself, I've been completely guilty of doing these webinars and simultaneously thinking it's a great chance to get through some emails. And I guess I would just encourage you, you know, this is a time that you've all taken to think about this topic, which is a really important topic for you. And as women, we tend not to give ourselves time very often. So I encourage you to try and just sit back and relax and think about you and let go of your emails for a little while. So first of all, very briefly about women in research, and many of you will be familiar with the initiative, but it's something started as part of my Kathleen Fitzpatrick component of the Laureate Award, and this is a sort of award that's given sort of over and above the laureate to recognise an ambassadorial role for women, and the women that have these awards, and there's also, this is the social science one, there's also one for all do things to try to support women. And what I decided to do was to set up this initiative, Women in Research, and you can see there the website. If you're not familiar with it, what you can find on that website is evidence-based guidance, but also we also have lots of wonderful insights, because as part of the initiative, I interviewed more than 30 female Australian laureates and centre directors, and you can see all those interviews and stories on the website. So I encourage you, if you're not familiar with it, to have an explore and see what you can find that helps you or the people that you manage. So what I want to do now is I want to talk a little bit about small change, because this is a small wins series. So what is this idea of small wins? And I guess normally I would explain exponential, you know, what does exponential change mean? But I think for this audience, you're all very familiar with exponential change. And I also think that, you know, COVID unfortunately has demonstrated the power of what happens with exponential change. But we can sort of apply that same concept of change, you know, accumulating and really making a small change, accumulating but making a very big difference. We can apply that thinking to our own lives. And, you know, if we want to change, if there's something that we want to work on, and let's face it, none of us are perfect, we're all working on things, then small change is a powerful way to do it. So if you see that little figure that I've got there, and this comes from a book by some clinical psychologists, to Leonard Cohen's, Leonard Curtins, sorry, not Leonard Cohen's. And what you can see there is they talk about, okay, we're all in our comfort zone, and our comfort zone is where we're happy, lying on the couch, you know, doing our normal routines, and it's easy, it's familiar, we know what we're doing. And that's where we are, which is lovely, very calming, etc. But we don't change, we don't develop if we stay in our comfort zone. Or to put it differently, the only way we're going to grow and develop and change is if we step outside that comfort zone. But the mistake that some people make is they step too far outside of their comfort zone into that zone there you can see where people are too stretched or overwhelmed, and they big radical changes. And, you know, sometimes that works, but most of the time, you know, either we just keep putting it off and never do it, or, you know, we try and do it and it doesn't work, and then we get overwhelmed and we go straight back into our comfort zone. So the idea of small changes is creating very small, manageable things that we can do. But with this idea, if we do them regularly, we can really create great change. So these guys talk about the idea of a 5-minute breakout. And what they suggest you do is you connect to what's important to you. So you think about what do you value, what's important to you, what are you trying to do here that you value? And then think about what's something you could do that's a small step to get towards what you value. So instead of, often what we do is we wait until we feel motivated. So, you know, I just had a conversation with my 17-year-old daughter, and, you know, about her study, and she's just waiting to wake up and feel motivated. And I'm basically saying to her, it's just not going to happen. So we're not trying to change how we think about the situation. We're not trying to get motivated. We're just going to take a small step and actually do something. So let me give a this is a real example, and I will say that it's an example from a friend. So you want to put in a grant application. So you wait for that time. You want to put in, you know, it needs a lot of time. You're looking for a morning, you're looking for a day, you're waiting, you're trying to find it, it just never happens. And meantime, you get closer and closer to the deadline, and you get more and more panicked, and the task gets more and more overwhelming, and you just, flip from not being able to do it to feeling completely stressed. So what would be a different strategy? And I can tell you that I have actually executed this strategy myself just this week. And what I'm doing, because this wasn't a friend, it was me, this is about me looking at putting in a Centre of Excellence application, which is frankly very daunting, not just because of their work, but because of the high rate of rejection. And so my small step that I've taken and I've put in place for this week is, instead of just trying to find this half day that's impossible, I'm just literally taking 5 minutes every morning to brainstorm some ideas for a possible centre. And I'm finding that that has really unblocked me, and I'm actually starting to get a bit excited about the idea. So small change is what we're aiming for. But what we're talking about today more broadly is mental health. And I just have here some statistics that show that women during COVID are, to some extent, bearing the brunt of COVID. And you can see there, even though women are 39% of employment, they account for 54% of job losses. There's some really disturbing analyses showing that women academics are starting fewer projects, publishing less during COVID, so less than men, but that's always true, sadly, but less, proportionately more than this same time last year, and also fewer first author women. And you can see there, you know, why some of the reasons, and there's a nice conversation article you can read if you're interested. Women tend to be in more teaching positions, more precarious positions anyway, and so they are to some extent getting more of the burden of things like online teaching, which has been a huge challenge for many people, and insecurity with redundancies and so on is an added pressure for many women. And of course also more domestic pressures during COVID. We know there's evidence shows that for most women, they are taking up the lion's share of domestic duties. And then, of course, during COVID, you know, that's even more the case when children are home and there's no homeschooling, sorry, there's a need to homeschool and so on. So it's really important, and sorry, just one last statistic there, that there's evidence that women's level of stress is greater. Everyone's stress has increased during COVID. Quite a few studies show that, but proportionately even more women. So what do we mean by mental health and well-being? I think the point I really just want to make here fairly briefly is that when we talk about mental health and well-being, we're not just talking about anxiety and depression. And of course, that is really important. And that's sort of more at the mental ill health end of that spectrum you see there. That is absolutely important and really critical. But just in the same way that physical health isn't only about sort of not being sick, physical health is also about being fit and, you know, having good cardiovascular functioning and so on. And just in that same way, mental health or well-being is also about thriving and being productive and feeling that you're growing and learning and connecting and having a meaningful life. And you can see that the World Health Organization definition of mental health is actually a state of well-being in which each individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, and that's important. So we're not trying to live a life where there's no stress and there's no anxiety and there's no miserableness, because normal life has all of that. But when people feel able to cope with that, that is what we mean by mental health, and they can work productively and fruitfully and make a contribution to his or her community. So let's have a little look at the 100 women that have completed the Work and Wellbeing Survey, and thank you so much to those people who have done that. We're hoping to build up a database about the lives and experiences of academic women through those surveys, and I hope that you also found the feedback that you got through the survey useful. But look at that. In the sample, we see that, and these are measures of burnout here. So I feel emotionally drained from my work. I feel used up at the end of the workday. And you can see that more than 50%, more than half of the people are agreeing or strongly agreeing with those statements. So that really suggests quite a high level of burnout for the women that did this survey, who are a mixture, mostly level Bs and Cs, a mixture of contract versus tenured, and a mixture of teaching and research and research-only positions. And let me say, we also looked at the level of psychological distress for this group, and the level 39% report experiencing high or very high psychological distress. And we've used the same measure that we've used in other studies, and that is a very high number. In fact, we did a study of FIFO workers during COVID, and as you may not know this, but FIFO workers have been away from their families for a long time, and for them the figure was 40%. So you can see that this group of people, at least the women in this sample who did this survey, are experiencing burnout and psychological distress, which is a concerning finding. I'm just going to very quickly show you some of the correlates of this stress, and all of you, many of you researchers, you know that correlations are not causality, but I just want to show you just some of the findings. First of all, we don't find that there's many differences for age, except that younger people experiencing more anxiety and depression. And I think that is a general trend across society. But we don't find any differences for level, contract status, contract type, or anything like that. But what we look at here is, let's first of all look at people's work design. And what I've done is I've just put in darker colour the stronger correlations, and I'm just going to pick out some highlights here. What you can see, if you look at the strongest correlation with burnout of the work design variables, in fact it's the strongest correlation in all of them, is whether you've got tolerable demand. So for people who are feeling that they have got a manageable workload with levels of homework balance that are reasonable, and low levels of role conflict, so the demands in the work are tolerable, then the burnout is much lower. Or to put it differently, one of the reasons that we're seeing such high burnout in this sample is almost certainly due to the workloads and homework challenges people are facing. So that's quite a strong finding there. And then if we look at broader context, you can unpack this a bit more later if you're interested, but things like, having a supportive climate, it's great for engagement and it reduces your anxiety and things. But the standout thing here for burnout actually is practical support. So if you're in an environment where you feel you're getting practical support, you're much less likely to experience burnout. And I think that makes complete sense because sometimes what you need more than anything is just someone to help, do the photocopying or those sort of tasks that are very practical. You can see there leadership. I won't go through it at all. Leadership is really important for facilitating a sense of engagement, and that's part of that sort of notion of thriving. And you can see it's associated with lowering anxiety and depression, not so strong for burnout. What we can also see here we've measured a whole bunch of behavioural strategies that people use to deal with stress. And I'm just going to, again, go straight to the highlight. What you can see there is that psychological detachment after work is a good correlate of lower levels of burnout. So we'll come back to later the importance of turning off after work, and this data seems to support that. And I just want to point out, if we look at mindsets and traits there, look at these two figures here. What this is people who are workaholics, and if you've done the survey, you will know if you're one of those, but people who are workaholics are people who feel guilty when they're not working, and they're often trying to do more than one thing at once. So if this describes you, your burnout is going to be much greater. And an overperformance mindset is when you feel like you should always say yes, and you feel like you're never quite doing enough and you need to be better and you need to do more. And so you sort of fall into this trap of overperforming almost. And again, that is associated with burnout. So that is a super quick whiz through of some very broad findings. And obviously these are not fancy analyses or anything, but I think they paint a picture of women being overloaded and suffering as a consequence. So in the light of that, what I wanted to focus on, and I'll talk about just for the next few minutes, is the importance of self-compassion. So I'll tell you a little bit about why, and then I'm going to talk more about what self-compassion is, and then I'm going to give some tips about it. So here's a really interesting set of findings. Compared to men, women show more compassion to other people. Okay, I think we know that, and it's sort of a stereotype, but it also happens to be true based on evidence. But they show less compassion to themselves, and there's a meta-analysis, quite recent meta-analysis showing that. So women actually tend to be critical of themselves and use more negative self-talk than men. So we're not very good at being kind to ourselves. If we are able to be kind to ourselves, if we are able to have self-compassion, it not only is going to help us, we're going to be less anxious, depressed, better able to cope with stress. We're going to be less ruminating and all these other wonderful things you can see listed there. We're also going to be more able to help other people too, because, and that's what's something that women often want to do, but if you don't look after yourself, it's hard to look after other people. So what is self-compassion? I'm sure some of you are wondering. So there's a person called Christine Neff, and she's done a lot of research on this topic. And there's three things that sort of define self-compassion. And the first is when you display self-compassion, you accept that it's okay to feel negative things. So one of the things that we sometimes can do is we can over-identify with our negative feelings, and our feelings just become us, and we're not even able to identify that we're having feelings. So self-compassion is about saying, well, I know I'm hurting, and that's okay. And another thing that's the opposite of self-compassion is sometimes when we run away from our feelings and try to avoid our feelings. So, you know, we might just think, oh, just keep working, you know, okay, that you know, I'm stressed and this was a big deal, but I'm just going to avoid that. I'm just going to keep working, and then have a bottle of wine at night and, you know, whatever. And that sort of avoidance strategy also tends to take its toll on you. So first thing with self-compassion is accept it's okay to have negative feelings or negative responses. The second thing is recognizing that everybody has those negative experiences. So I think sometimes we tend to think we're the only ones who might, you know, feel this way in a certain situation or get stressed or feel anxious. But in the end, we are all struggling with the world. There is a common humanity, and it helps sometimes to remind ourselves of that. And the third one is this thing about, I mentioned that women tend not to be so good at talking to themselves in a kind way. We tend to be self-critical, but self-kindness is being kind and patient and warm with yourself. That's what self-compassion is, and I'm just going to give you an example. And so here's an example. Imagine that a paper you've been working on for months and months and months is rejected. So if you had a low self-compassion perspective, one thing you might think is, well, this is a disaster, my career is destroyed, I hate academia, the reviewers are, you know, and you're not actually, you're so much engrossed in the feelings of pain, you're not actually stepping back to recognize those feelings. Or, as I said, you can also be avoidant and just go, well, let's just move on, it's not important, and you sort of dismiss that this is an important thing for you. In contrast, a high self-compassion approach would be really to say, well, look, yeah, this is difficult. This really hurt. You know, I put a lot of effort into this and I'm hurting at this moment. And that's part of that self-compassion. And then common humanity is where you're thinking, I'm the problem, I'm useless, I'm the one who can't write a decent paper. There's something wrong with me. Whereas a high self-compassion approach is to say, well, I'm not alone. All academics get their papers rejected. You know, none of us are perfect. And just recognizing the common humanity of this experience. And then, of course, we've all had those feelings sometimes where we beat ourselves up. You know, I'm useless, I'm a failure at this, I should give up, etc. You know, and here is a very nice strategy to think about is if you're someone that does beat yourself up, take a little moment to reflect. If your friend's paper was rejected and your friend was feeling upset, what would you say to your friend? And then maybe that's something you could say to yourself, because we tend sometimes to be much harsher on ourselves than we are to other people. In a sense, it's like what we're talking about here is creating an inner ally, not an inner critic. There's enough critics in the world, you know, all the reviewers, they're the critics. What we need is an ally from ourselves. And that's a very short talk about self-compassion, and I've got a blog and video that you can see a link to there. There's some fabulous websites developed by researchers with good resources that provide activities. So if any of this has resonated for you, it's felt like it might be something that you need to practice being a bit kinder to yourself, have a look at some of those websites and resources. Sometimes people think that self-compassion is selfish, but in fact the research shows the exact opposite. If you can be kind to yourself, it actually makes you stronger, and it actually makes you more able to deal with setbacks and also to help other people, which many of us are motivated to do and see as important in our lives. There's lots more strategies for improving mental health and well-being, and we just don't have time to go through them all. But in our next session, we're going to look at homework challenges, which, as I indicated, was one of the big factors influencing burnout in our survey. And there's a lot more, and I've put some more resources there. But just to acknowledge, what I've talked about is just one tiny little slice of strategies. And if it doesn't resonate with you, there are other things that you might want to try. Now we are getting to the point where I will pass you to our wonderful panel members. So thank you for being with us so far. I'm going to next pass you to Professor Christine Beveridge from the University of Queensland. And Christine is an ARC Laureate Fellow. She's also just this year found out that she was the successful lead on an ARC Centre of Excellence for plant success in nature and agriculture. And this is I can't remember how many millions she can tell you, but $30+ million centre that Christine has led. So you'll hear from Christine in just a moment, and then we'll go to Professor Lorraine Mazerolle, who is from the University of Queensland as well. So thank you, Queensland, for sharing your wonderful laureates. And Lorraine is also an ARC Laureate Fellow, and she's a Chief Investigator also with an ARC Centre of Excellence around children and families over the life course. And Lorraine is our criminologist. And so after we've heard from Christine, we'll have a couple of questions, and then we'll go to Lorraine, and then we'll come back to all three of us if we've got time for a few final questions, and then we will share with you our small goals for the future. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and we will go to Christine. Are you there, Christine?
Hi, Sharon. Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Great. We can hear you. Fantastic. So when you're ready, Christine, tell us about your experiences, your thoughts around how to stay mentally healthy and thrive at this time.
Yes, thanks, Sharon. Look, I've learned a lot already today, so thanks very much for that.
Great.
And I was also reading something in the conversation, I think it was earlier, that actually highlights you, Sharon, as one of the top 40 Australian researchers. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
And Lorraine, I clicked on the UQ website today, and there were you with your photograph as one of the UQ's leading lights, having achieved something amazing, I'm very sure. So, you know, it's just a really pleasure to be here, sort of joining you guys. But I thought I'd just start off by letting people know a little bit about myself and what it was like for me kind of growing up as a human. I didn't really have any role models of women that were in what I would call leadership roles. So I didn't know any female accountants, lawyers, doctors, Indian chiefs, etc. So heading off to uni, I was going to be a teacher because I could either be a teacher, a secretary, or a nurse, or perhaps I could work in Kmart. And you know, so it's always been a bit of a challenge, you know, self-identifying with my journey. And we talked earlier, Sharon, about imposter syndrome, and it might be that some of your audience might identify with that. But I think that's something that can impact one as well. As we talk about looking after yourself. And I think in particular, one needs to really look after oneself. I love that point that you made, Sharon, about that. So how does one, you know, manage one's sort of mental health? And there's a couple of things that always come to mind to me. And one is always trying to enjoy whatever's happening in the moment. Always taking an opportunity in a positive light. I just want to come across some of those things, and you listed today about you know, really positive things can lead to burnout as well. And so I want to reflect on a really early story that I find quite funny. As a young PhD student, I found myself in the role of creating a postgraduate student association at UTAS. University of Tasmania, where I was, and I was also doing my PhD, and I just felt really, really overloaded. And so I thought, oh, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of the psychology or sort of counselling services. So I wandered along to them, and I sort of said, oh, look, I'm struggling. Can you give me some tips about how to better manage my time, because I'm doing such a pathetic job of it? And so he said, well, tell me what you're doing, Christine. And so I listed all the things I'm doing, and then he sort of sat back in his chair and he said, well, the only problem with you is there's too much on your plate. You're doing too much. And, you know, that feedback was a pivotal game changer for me. And so pretty much any time now where I'm starting to get a bit overloaded, I will seek out advice from people around me, often professionals in counselling, or often it'll be a development thing that will help me with advice on how to manage, such as just simply recognising that I've got too much on and perhaps I should lower my goals a bit. Yeah, so that's sort of given me a philosophy that whenever I've had a big win or a major hurdle, it's a flag for me to say you probably need to go and get a little bit of training, some advice. And I found that to be really, really helpful. And this might range from a whole bunch of different things, such as, you know, watching, these days you can watch a YouTube course thing. For example, Brene Brown on vulnerability is a great one that had an impact on me. And now I'm reading her book on gifts of imperfection, which is relating to a lot of the things that Sharon has spoken about before. Or I might actually do a course. Right now I've got a coach that's helping with my new role as director of the centre, and these things are having a massive impact on my sort of abilities, but also my self-reflection, which I think is really, really, really useful. And I think the analogy also that Sharon made was about, you know, physical health. And I think it's really helpful to think of your career sometimes a bit like an endurance event. Now, who would go and run a marathon without doing a heap of training, you know? And so if you're about to embark on something quite challenging, then, you know, get some training, you know, chat with your friends, get your support team and this sort of thing. And I've always done that. And I think it's been really, really helpful. Yes. Thing I do. And so the other thing was around thinking about success relative to opportunity. That's something the ARC always talks about in the rope section, you know, success relative to opportunity. But you know what? I think it's really important to think about that pretty much every day. You know, you've got certain opportunities, and if you're trying to kick goals that are way outside of your opportunity potential, then you're going to be disappointed. But also sometimes your opportunities are really horrible, like COVID. And I'll give another example. I had breast cancer a while back, and you know, it's a bit of a shock when you know, you've got something like that. And I was trying to put a positive lens on it, and at the end my positive lens was about, hey, this is a great opportunity to learn watching Netflix. I hadn't got into Netflix yet, so like, and I found some great things to watch and some great books to read, and we went on family holiday. So we just sort of spun it around to sort of think, well, what is the opportunity that does provide by the fact that you're sort of stuck at home a bit more than usual. So
thanks, Christine. I don't know if Jess is there. Have you got any questions, Jess? Jess?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry,
yes.
I was just finding my mute button.
Yes, sorry to interrupt you there, Christine. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to just ask Jess to pose a couple of questions to you that's either that have come up on Slido or that she has got for herself.
Yeah, so we had a question come through for Christine on Slido, which was, what is some of the best advice you could offer to early career researchers?
Well, I think that last point I was making was about opportunity. Mm-hmm. I think it's always the case to make the best of opportunities whilst being kind to yourself. So I don't mean overloading yourself, but a great example of that was once when I hopped onto a bus at a conference and I saw only one person I recognised. So I made the opportunity to sit next to that person, and I ended up getting a postdoc at UQ as a consequence of that opportunity, you know. And I think, you know, taking the opportunity to enjoy yourself when you've got 5 minutes at the doctor's surgery, instead of worrying about what's going to happen. Pick up something and read it and enjoy it. Instead of worrying about what's happened during your day, take a moment to enjoy your friends and family after work. Yeah, that'd be my strongest advice.
Yeah, that's great advice. Jess, is there one more question?
Yeah, we just had another one come through. Or now, oh gosh, now the more are coming through. Okay.
Just pick
so
one.
We have, yeah. We have, okay, another one coming through. Although I know the importance of work-life balance, I can't help stop working, which I think is better, or I feel less guilty than when I'm doing other activities. But on the other hand, I know it will let me burn out. Is there any suggestion of how to deal with this kind of struggle?
Yes.
So this person is one of those workaholics that I was referring to earlier.
My answer to that would be to schedule in your social activities. So you need to recognise that you need to have fun in order to succeed academically. So that means you need to schedule in fun time and you need to adhere to it. So you need to make sure you at least have a whole day off on the weekend all the time, even when you're busy. You need to make sure you have time off in the evening. You need to schedule time with friends. You need to think of yourself as a small business where, you've got to be kind to the manager as well as having outputs. So schedule. If you're struggling, recognise it and schedule it.
And I like what you're saying there, Christine, about the importance of scheduling it, because, it's all right. It goes back to what we were saying about these small changes. You can have these wonderful intentions and, etc., but you're only going to do it if you put it in your diary and keep it free. So I love that suggestion. Well, thank you so much, Christine. We'll have the opportunity at the end for some more questions to Christine. But I just want to say how much I love your advice about being in the moment. I think that is really, and this is what mindfulness is actually. But you just said it so beautifully. And the other thing I loved was that you get advice and help, and that you reach out to a coach or a therapist or a friend or whatever. And I think that is also critical, because none of us are able to do everything. So thank you so much, Christine. We hopefully have some time for a couple more questions at the end. But now I'd love to welcome Lorraine. If you can share with us your thoughts, Lorraine, about either your own mental health, others. Are you there?
Yes, great. Thank you so much, and thank you, Sharon, for putting all of this together and sharing your thoughts. And Christine, your advice, I think, is absolutely fantastic. And I think getting a coach and really learning every opportunity, I think, are really sound words. So Sharon, you posed some questions which were really helpful. So your first question about my own, what do I do in terms of my own mental health? So I guess sort of taking it back, I have a history of being involved in a lot of different sports. I've played competitive sports since I was a young child, and I competed at really high levels in terms of netball and swimming and tennis and triathlons, and anything that I ever did, I competed in sports. So that's both been a blessing and a curse a little bit for me. It's been a blessing because it was always a real focus for me. And, if it was, 5 o'clock and I had to get on a bike or go to a swim training session, I would just pack up and go. And so it was really good in my early stages. And then it kind of turned on me, because you imagine being a PhD student, an early career researcher, and, the bar, I was in the States. I did my master's and PhD in the States. And so, here's a goal, go do this. Well, what does the sports person do? They just go full on, 100%, you don't even stop to think. So the next thing I knew, I'm working 70, 80, 90 hours a week in, week in, week out, month in, month out. And I did that for years. And so it sort of turned on, that competitiveness and that history of being able to train and to tolerate a huge amount of pain really sort of turned on me. And so I had to kind of unpack that as I sort of entered into some more senior phases of my career, because it's not sustainable to be working, 70, 80 hours a week. And, at the time I had a young family, and it really kind of all imploded. So, I can put up my hand that I have really imploded over different stages in my career. So I really had to find a new way of positively engaging as an academic. And so while my children were young, I'd completely given up most of my sports and might go for a run here and there, but really hadn't done any competitive sports. So as the children got a little bit older, I took up golf. So, well, that's kind of a stupid thing to do, because it's, a very, very, very time-consuming and incredibly difficult sport. But it's actually been there was a reason why I did it, because when you're skiing, for example, when you're skiing down the mountain, you cannot think of work, or else you will crash into a tree. When you are playing golf and you are thinking about work, you will put the ball into the bunker and you will not get it out, or you'll put it into the water and you can't get it out. So it's this kind of choosing that outlet, I think, that truly does take you away from the pressures of work, where you can really completely unplug. And, different things work for different people. So that's my issue. You also asked about what I'm doing to support some of my early career researchers. So one of the things I do is that I always sit down and I show them my CV, and I show them the very big gap in my CV when I had young children. And so I don't try to pretend that I was super productive during those years, and I wasn't, I think really normalizing that your career is going to have some very high productive time periods, and it's going to have some really low productive periods as well. And I think COVID's been a bit, for some people who haven't had a lot of teaching responsibilities, it's actually been an incredibly productive time, because all of those papers, they've been able to actually get to them. The flip side is that those people that have had really heavy teaching loads, there's no way, so it's going to be interesting to see how things play out in terms of rope and, all of those different sections, because for some people it's been more productive than others. And I think on the whole, your data really show that the women, and particularly young women, have been particularly on the side of having a lot of teaching responsibilities. So I guess in terms of some of the practical things, I think the biggest thing that I do for my staff is to try to give them really practical help. So if they need help to put all of their budgets together for a grant application, that takes time. All of their cases, having a proofreader go over their papers, doing all the references, like that just is so time consuming. And everything that I can do, it's like the butterfly effect, a whole lot of little things that you can do to take some of that burden off, to free some of that time up for your staff. And I also think, hooking off what you're saying, Christine, is actually scheduling in that time. I've sat with my staff and I said, well, you're saying that you're going to work on that paper, but I can't see it in your calendar. Where is it in your calendar? And they're saying, oh, I'll do it after the kids are in bed. I said, no. You will put it into your calendar, and you'll put 3 or 4 hours in there that you are not available. And that's a really difficult thing for people to give themselves permission that this is actually my time, and people can ask me for a meeting, but sorry, I'm busy, and giving themselves permission. So real practical things I think is very important. And then I think the real important thing that one of the questions that you asked me is, what does it mean to thrive in your work? And I always think of it as a leader, and what I want from my leaders is I want them to give me the wings, the wind under my wings. I don't need them to give me the wings. I don't need them to give me anything. I need them to give me some wind, the support that I need to bring my team along, or my teaching team along. And that's a really hard thing to put into practice, but sometimes it's as much as having support from the senior executive to say, hey, you're actually doing a really good job and we value what you're doing. You know, that's some wind that sits underneath your wings. So I might just leave it at that.
Thanks, Lorraine. That is fantastic. And, you know, again, fantastic guidance for people, because many of the people who are listening are Bs and Cs, and some of them will be having PhD students and stuff. And so I love that you've given guidance for also how to support other people. But your golf one is excellent, because in the survey, one of the things that we found was the importance of detaching from work. And both you and Christine have really highlighted, you know, you need to do that, and scheduling it in, and golf being a powerful mechanism for you. So thank you so much. So Jess, do we have some questions for Lorraine? You're on mute, by the way.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm walking across 3 screens. Yes, we had a few questions around academic culture and sort of workload, and we also had a few questions around imposter syndrome and accepting support and that sort of thing. So one from the sort of academic culture side of things is academic culture feeds into the overload issue. It's often not considered normal to want to be working a normal week. And I've seen people frown at other academics wanting to achieve that. How can we change this culture and normalise healthier work schedules and healthier workloads?
Okay, so I think the answer to that is that you have to lead by example, and be really transparent about how you're spending your time. So with my team, we never, you know, like things like, you know, someone needs to go to reading group with their child at school, rather than trying to, you know, say that they're just going to be in late that day. It's actually bringing forth that and saying, actually, I'm going to reading group with my daughter, and then we can all talk about it and say, yeah, you know, I did that too, and it's really good and it's really healthy. So it's actually, you know, it's not putting the everyone works hard, you know, and it's all about, you know, you need to work in a way that suits your family and your life and your lifestyle. And so I think that, you know, rather than trying to pretend that you're not doing things that matter to you in terms of your family, is actually celebrating it. And so that's one of the ways that I feel really strongly about creating that academic culture, where people feel that they are not just treated like a machine that comes into work, and just that they're treated as a human being in a holistic way.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question. Do we have time for another?
Yep.
Okay, so this is a question that's posed to the panel in general. So what was the turning point for the panel members that made them accept the coaching or some mentoring help that was available and so willingly offered by others? So what was something that made you accept the help from others?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
So, in my entire career, I've only ever had one coaching opportunity, which is not enough, really. you know, in the early days, I always used to say, I'm just too busy for this. I can't, you know, I can't cope with it. And then finally, when I did get the opportunity to have a coach, it was really quite transformative. And I really would, you know, I think what Christine does in a proactive way, I think is really good, is seeking out that kind of coaching opportunity. So my personal, I like the one-on-one coaching, and but I think different people, you know, like different things. So Christine, what's your perspective there?
Look, I think that in life, people put a lot of pressure on people in all sorts of ways: what you wear, what you eat, what you drink, what you say, what you laugh at, etc. And I think this coaching thing is just one other aspect of it. My true belief is that, you know, if we're in research, we're in a lifelong learning, and we should be seeking out how to do our jobs better and better every day, in every single way. And it's an extremely normal thing to seek that out in any kind of way that presents itself. And I would just ask that people, if presented with an opportunity, really engage with it. Like Sharon said today, you know, spending time here, let's really engage here. I think if somebody's saying to you, why do you need that? Then I think that person's probably not worth the time of you interacting with them, because they just don't get it. And yeah, I just think it's so important. And I think just keep doing it.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And there's no, you know, it's like there is still a stigma around getting help. But I think it's really great that both of you shared that how helpful it's been to get help. And it's okay to get help. And that's part of being successful. So thank you. Jess, I think we've got time for one more question.
One more, yeah.
One more quick one.
I think this is a good one. So the question is, I have a heavy teaching load with 450 plus students, being the sole coordinator and lecturer, but I don't have any kids. I feel incredibly guilty, and I'm hard on myself for not being more productive research-wise during COVID. Any advice?
Oh, look, I think that, you know, kids, no kids, dogs. I've got my dog here, by the way. No dogs, you know, like people have complex lives. And, you know, there's lots of different pressures that people have in their lives. So, you know, and you know, the burnout around teaching. I mean, I got to tell you, I taught a course in semester one, only half of the course, and my colleague taught the other half. And I got to tell you, talking into a computer and doing a lecture into a computer gave me a massive headache. I had a headache every single night during that semester one. It was just horrible. I went to bed every night with a booming headache. And, you know, you just can't be as productive as you can when you've got those really heavy loads, because they just drain everything out of you. So, you know, I think your statement there about self-compassion is so important, Sharon, because you've got to be kind to yourself, because you can't, there's sometimes that you just can't, you know, do 40, 50, 60 hours. You just can't do it. And it's not okay to even expect that of yourself.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. And I think I'll go from there actually to the concept of small steps, because to that person who's feeling really guilty, you know, and perhaps then when you feel guilty and you're not feeling productive enough, maybe you're starting to tell yourself, oh, I'm not being productive, and beating yourself up. And here's where it might be good to just set yourself a very small goal, a very small thing that you could do to change. That's the thing we want to end on today, because I want to encourage all of you who've attended, and thank you so much. We've had wonderful attendance, but I want to encourage you to think of a small thing that you could do that would improve your mental health or your thriving or your well-being. I'll just very quickly share mine, and I'm going to ask Lorraine and Christine to share theirs. So the thing that I'm going to do, and I have a slide on it, but I won't bother flipping back to that, but is I ride my bike to work, and I ride along the Swan River here in Perth, and it's beautiful. But I sometimes will find that 30 minutes has gone by in a blur, because all I've done is write to-do lists in my brain and think, oh, well, I must do this, I must do that, I must forget this. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to enjoy 5 minutes of that ride. So whenever I see the lady statue, that's my cue. When I see her, she's this statue out in the water. What I do is I just do 5 minutes of sort of meditation. So I'm not very good at meditation, but what I do is I think about the wind on my skin. So I think about what I can feel. I think about what I can see. I think about what I can smell. I think about what have I missed? Anyway, my 5 senses. I go through them all, and I just take a little moment, and I do that twice. And I have to say I was rewarded the other day because 5 dolphins came past as I was looking at what could I see. So I rewarded myself. But that's what I'm going to do. I commit to doing that between now, every time I ride my bike, now and the next one of these. So that's what I'm doing. Christine, what are you going to do?
Yes, I was thinking about that, and I realised that the thing I need to do is really appreciate my morning coffee on my deck before I head off to work. And you know, it's just such a pleasure to take a moment by yourself and just take that, you know, of a nice coffee machine. I really enjoy the flavour, I enjoy the moment, and the air's a bit fresh, and it's just beautiful time. But I don't always do it, and I need to do it every day, I think, because it's then that you sort of, you know, get in touch with yourself and your body and your realness and your atoms, you know what I mean? Yeah. Otherwise you are just a machine, and you forget. And I truly think that you are more kind to others. I can feel it if I take that moment. And that's really important.
Thank you.
That's my thing.
Excellent. We'll check up on you in a month. Lorraine, how about you? What do you think?
I'm going over to Christine's for a cup of coffee, actually. So
sit on the deck together.
Well, I had a bit of a, you know, like I wrestle with things a lot, and my wrestle has been golf, because I'm, you know, I only took it up 4 years ago, and you know, it's a tough game. And so my coach, my golf coach, he said to me, he said, Lorraine, what are you doing when you're out there playing golf? And I'm like, well, I'm trying to bloody well hit the ball. That's what I'm trying to do. And he said, the game is to play. You are playing golf. What is that verb? That verb means to play. And it was a real epiphany for me, because it made me sort of say, well, if I'm not enjoying trying to hit this damn ball, then what am I doing here? So I think that the one small goal for me is actually to, you know, to play, you know, and to be playful in those, well, for me it's for golf. But I would sort of say to people is that if you're playing with the dog, you know, that's to play. You're playing with the dog or whatever. You're playing with the children, you know, you're playing or what have you. And it's important to remember what that verb actually means.
Thank you so much. And again, it's about being in the moment, isn't it? So, look, thank you, Lorraine and Christine. It's been an absolute delight and privilege to have you. Thank you to the wonderful people who've joined in. I can see we had at one point around 100 lovely women. So thank you so much. I wish we could see you all and hear from you all. But do please, this is our first one. So we welcome feedback for topics or format, anything you want to suggest. And just last but not least, I'd love to thank the wonderful team that's been behind this. Sana's been there, Jess, Isabel, and others. So I wish you good mental health and some well-being for the rest of the week, and look forward to having you hopefully join us again on November the 4th is our next one, where we're going to focus on this big challenge around home life and work life, and how we get, well, I don't like the word balance, but how we get some sort of harmony there. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lorraine. Thanks, Christine. Cheers.
Thanks, team. Bye.